Hello everyone, welcome to Out of Spec Testing. I'm Ryan. Today we have a 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 5 courtesy of Hyundai Crossroads. Huge shout out to them. And we're going to be taking it on our 10% challenge. That's our road trip simulation test. Let me tell you a little bit about this new 2025 Ioniq 5 and about our testing procedures. This is the 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 5. This is the SEL, so the mid-trim with the big battery, and this battery has actually been updated. It is no longer the 77.4 kilowatt hour battery, it is 84 kilowatt hours, and it's supposed to charge at up to 260 kilowatts. Even though it's a higher peak, it actually does charge a little bit slower. It no longer claims 10 to 80% in 18 minutes, it now says 10 to 80% in 20 minutes. So a little bit slower, however, the bigger battery means that we get about 15 more miles of range, which is nice. I haven't yet taken this on a range test, but that will be coming up soon, and I'm excited to see what it'll do. Regardless, this is a very good charging vehicle, and although we won't get to 10 to 80%, because that'll take 20 minutes, this should onboard a ton of energy. We've seen this a lot with tons of EGMT vehicles, like, coincidentally enough, all the vehicles here, but they charge extremely well, they've got very flat curves, and they can onboard a lot of energy. And that's really important for road trips, because when you're stopping for a charge stop, you need to get as much energy as quickly as possible in order to get on your way. To that extent, we've created this 10% challenge, and it's essentially a road trip simulation. Once we've set the tires to the factory recommended pressures, I then drive the car down to precisely 10% state of charge and fully precondition the battery. Now, I should see full charging speeds the moment I plug in. However, there is a little bit of delay between when I plug in and when it actually starts charging. That's the handshake time. We record it separately, so there's an actual 15 minutes of real charging. During those 15 minutes, I'll be in the car with the car on, and I'll have the HVAC running. This is, again, to simulate a road trip. Oftentimes on road trips, charging stops, you're in the car hanging out and you've got the HVAC running. This puts extra strain on the system because it's responsible for keeping the battery in the right temperature and also making sure that the cabin is cool. After 15 minutes, I'll go ahead and unplug from the charger, and I'll set up all my cameras, which I'm very excited about on this time, and we can head out onto the highway. We're going to go just right over there onto the highway and do a nice gentle acceleration like we always do, minimizing heat losses up to 80 miles an hour. And that's 80 miles per hour GPS speed, which actually matches the speedometer here. So it'll be 80 miles an hour. And we're gonna see how far we can go with the replenished range. Once I've used about half of my replenished range, I'm gonna go ahead and put this charger in as a destination and turn around. What that will do is make this a loop style test, and hopefully I'll get back to this charger with very close to or almost exactly 10% state of charge. This is an out and back style test, so it negates any elevation gain and helps try to cancel out any wind as much as possible. Still, this is out in the real world and we do not have ideal conditions. Right now it's about 35 degrees and we've got about a 20 mile per hour wind coming for us once we get onto the road, unfortunately. However, despite these non-ideal conditions, I still think the Ioniq 5 is going to be able to do well. We usually say a result of 100 miles or better is good, and I think that's definitely within the cards today. And I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. It says normal up here for the battery conditioning, and if I try to activate it, it says battery conditioning unavailable, battery temperature is already optimized. And normally it would, if it were heating, it'd have some little coils right in there, but of course, we are fully set up and ready to go, so that's not the case. One final thing I forgot to mention was that on the way back, we are going to be putting this charger in as a destination, and that will also precondition the battery. This has route planning, and we'll make sure that the battery is at the right temperature when we get back here. And again, that's simulating a road trip. You'll oftentimes be hopping from charger to charger, and you need to have a warm battery to get the best charging speeds. It does use a little bit of energy, but we think that it's pretty realistic. So with that, let's go ahead and plug on in. 40-second handshake. I've started my watch, and let's take a look inside. get the snow off. And as you can see, we are ramping up. And I also have my camera set up, and there's a good little gap. You should be able to see everything on it. I'm a little bit concerned about the angle. If anyone has any suggestions on where to put this, how to set it up, I'd love to hear. But we'll give this a shot and see how it looks, see how it turns out, what it's like driving with it. But as of right now, we are still just ramping up. And it stopped at 152 for whatever reason. I've noticed that this charging is kind of pretty finicky. It's very difficult to understand exactly what's going on and when it jumps up, why it jumps up, why it's only at 150 right now, and why it's now jumping up. But we'll keep an eye on things. And just a few moments later, and we're ramping up to, let's see what it goes up to actually. Over 200, 205. Nice, that's pretty good. A few other things to show you. I've got the climate on driver only, auto on setting 1. I'm keeping it between 68 and 72 like I always do. And additionally, I can show you my drive mode, eco. So that's what we're on, and yeah, still pulling just over 200 kilowatts. Just about 5 minutes in there, 211 kilowatts, and we're at 27% state of charge. We've delivered just under 15 kilowatt hours. You probably can't see that, but I'm able to see it. Moments after I finished that clip, ramping it up, nice. Cool, this is the peak that I was expecting to see. But I guess 30% state of charge is what it wanted, maybe? Could be thermal, who knows? Halfway through, 39% state of charge, still doing 252 kilowatts, and it says that we've delivered 25 kilowatt hours right there. So just under 25 at 15 minutes. One thing I did want to mention is this vehicle is technically still under embargo. So I'm not allowed to talk about the driving characteristics, what it's like to be in, a lot of these details. I can tell you about the features, a lot of like the hardware stuff, like I can show you stuff, but I can't tell you if it rides nicely, if it doesn't, if it's fast or slow, or any of those details, which I think is a little silly considering that you can go out and just buy one right now. This is going to be delivered to someone, this specific Ioniq 5 that we're in. So even though media isn't able to talk about it, some random person should be able to just buy one and talk about it. Regardless, I'm going to be following the rules. I'm not going to be discussing how this vehicle drives, any of those details that we're not allowed to discuss. So I'll be focusing mostly on just the actual road trip and then hard numbers and features. And we already see it drop down to 203 kilowatts. That's pretty disappointing. I was hoping it would hold that for more than 15%, but was not meant to be, I suppose. Now it's down at 180 kilowatts, so nothing crazy, but still 49% is pretty good, and we're just at 10 minutes right now. 13 minutes in and 60% state of charge, it dropped down to 160 kilowatts. Yeah, this is worse than the old one. That's unfortunate, but we'll see how much energy is actually delivered shortly. Stop that. Okay, 48.5 kilowatt hours. Yeah, 48.5 kilowatt hours. All right, I mean, I think that's pretty much in line with previous EGMP vehicles. So this does not charge any faster or slower, I guess. We'll take a closer look in a bit, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, make sure I'm in eco. Climate is set, driver only, auto 68. I will reset this and we'll get going. One other thing to note is that I have the regen braking on level 3. You can see that next to the state of charge where it says 66%, it says level 3. And again, that's the regen braking level. and that is the maximum I can do before it goes into iPedal mode. And iPedal mode is it does a lot of stuff, and unfortunately it will force both the motors to be on all the time. So essentially we won't be able to have the front motor disconnect. That will help with efficiency. So we're not using iPedal, we're using level 3, and we're using the eco mode for the drive mode, so that will mean that we can get as good of efficiency as possible. I'm now gently accelerating up to 80 miles an hour, and there is a nice little toll lane that I can get into. Not sure if you can see the speedometer or not. It's a little difficult to see on the action camera screen, but it's still almost there, and there we go. We charged up to 66%, and that means we added 56%. As I mentioned, we're doing an out and back style test, so I want to turn around somewhere around halfway through my replenished range. So we added 56%, so half of that is 28%. So 66% minus 28%, that'll be 38%. So I should turn around somewhere around 38-ish percent, yeah, high 30s% state of charge in order to make it back to the charger with a 10% state of charge. So that's going to be the plan, and we'll just buckle in for now. Let's briefly talk about some of the updates that the Ioniq 5 has for 2025. It is technically a refresh, a facelift, but it's really quite minor. There are new front and rear bumpers. It looks a little bit different. There is the bigger battery, like I mentioned, 84 kilowatt hours instead of the 74.4 or 77.4, excuse me, and slightly faster charging. We saw 252 kilowatts here, and usually it's 230, 240 for the previous generation. So the bigger battery is probably the biggest thing. Additionally, the Ioniq 5 now has a rear wiper, so you can see out the back when it's grimy out, which is really nice. I know a lot of owners were really keen on getting that, so happy to see that they have that now. Additionally, there's the newest version of their infotainment, and I think it's I've got Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, so happy with that. And finally, one of the things that they added was they added a bunch of buttons over to this center control stack, and it has all of the things that you would use really frequently. So like home, map, changing your music, a volume knob, heated seats, heated steering wheel, all of these things that you would typically expect to be buttons and are nice to have easy access are now finally actual physical buttons. So a bunch of really nice updates. And oh yes, one last thing, an important one, is the charging port is now different. It's now the NACS J3400 port. Same one as Tesla's, but yeah, that's different. So if you do have a old charger of J1772, you would need to get an adapter for this, but it's not too expensive, and I think the reality of most EVs in the US right now is you're going to have to carry an adapter of some kind most of the time. But that kind of brings you mostly up to speed with a lot of the updates for this technically refreshed 2025 Ioniq 5. A lot of great updates, but relatively small ones. Nice to have, but not critical. I'm sure you can see how bright it is at the top. I'll point it away a little bit. There you go. Hopefully you can still read everything just fine. We are at 51% state of charge. We've gone 28 miles, 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour. And honestly, it's a beautiful day. It is blue skies, no clouds. It just said it was 35 degrees. Now it's saying 33. So still a little cold, but what can you do? It's winter in Colorado. But yeah, a really beautiful, nice day. And the one other thing I do want to mention is we've got actually quite a bit of wind, about 20 miles an hour. So definitely significant and will impact the results for this. So cold weather and wind means that this will be considerably less efficient than ideal conditions, which would be 70 plus degrees with no wind. So it is handicapped, but the reality is we do our testing in the real world, and there's only so much we can do to control these variables. So I'm happy that it's still at least a beautiful day and we're able to get the test done. If it were raining or snowing or much more windy, then we probably wouldn't be testing, but at least we can get some data out of this. The wind is quite noticeable up here, but again, like I said, real world conditions, and we'll get real world results. We're at 41 miles more or less, 2 miles per kilowatt hour, 41% state of charge. I'm thinking about turning around soonish, but might take another exit or two. We'll see. Now slowing down, going to be taking the exit for right here. We're at 35% state of charge, so a little lower than I said, but won't be a problem. And as per usual, I'm doing regenerative braking. Like I mentioned before, I'm on level 3, which is the highest level. I'm going to use as much regen braking as possible to put as much energy back into the pack. And a gentle acceleration as well to minimize any losses, maximizing the amount of highway range that we actually have. I'd love to see how far these can go in the best case scenario. I don't want to handicap any of them. We are stuck behind a truck, but that'll be okay. It'll make sure that we accelerate slowly, I suppose. And there we go, set at 80. You can see battery conditioning activated for optimal DC fast charging. Glad you guys got to see that message. It was only up for a very brief second, but as you can see, 30% state of charge, and we've got the coils. You can see the battery is heating, and we've gone 57 miles at 2 miles per kilowatt hour. However, the efficiency is a little bit better on the way back, but we're looking like it might be a little bit short of 100 miles. We'll have to see, but I think this wind has been pretty brutal. Okay, look at that. 10% state of charge. We are at 93 miles and an indicated 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. That is not quite the 100 miles that we were hoping to get. So 93. And again, the charging wasn't super great, but let's take a moment and do a bit of a deeper analysis on this. See how this compares with other vehicles that in its class, and how this looks compared to basically everything else. Let's first review charging. The first thing I want to say is this is a good result. It charged well, and 48.5 kilowatt hours is a very good result. It's a lot of energy. My disappointment comes from the comparison with other eGMP vehicles. 2 EV6s and 1 Ioniq 6 managed to deliver a little bit more energy than the updated 2025 Ioniq 5. It's a difference of only 1 or 2 kilowatt hours, but I would normally expect better results considering this is a larger battery and it has a higher peak charging speed. Essentially, Hyundai slightly nerfed the charging curve of the new Ioniq 5. Now, I want to mention there is an Ioniq 6 that delivered considerably less energy. However, that had a peak charging speed of only 215 kilowatts, so I think there must have been something wrong with that charging session. It also doesn't align with any of the other eGMP tests that we've completed as far as energy delivered, so again, I think there may have been something with the charging there. I will say the Ioniq 5 is still just about as fast as the fastest charging 400-volt vehicle, the Rivian, and those Rivians have a relatively high voltage pack and a pretty flat charging curve at 500 amps for a lot of the 15 minutes. The EV6 is able to match that amount of energy, and that's delivered to a truck. That's right there is just a pretty impressive feat. It's also more than a Tesla Model S, a Tesla Model X, Mercedes EQS. All of the vehicles I've mentioned have impressive charging curves with very good peak charging speeds, and the Ioniq 5 is still right there with them. The only vehicles that charge appreciably better are vehicles that cost $100,000, like the Porsche Taycan or Lucid Air GT, as well as the massive battery in the Silverado EV. Yes, I would have loved to see slightly faster charging, It would have been great if Hyundai maintained that 18 minutes from 10 to 80% rather than the 20 minutes it is now, but it's not that big of a difference, and we're pretty close to the same amount of energy delivered over 15 minutes. At least we didn't lose any charging performance. I also want to clarify that this is actually a really solid charging session from what I've experienced. I charged the car 3 times on a 350 kilowatt charger, recording the session each time, and it was actually slightly different every time, but I did reach the peak charging speeds of around 250 kilowatts every time. The charging session here in the 10% challenge was actually a little bit better than the curve that we got from 0 to 100%. So again, this is a really good charging session and probably representative of what the car can deliver. Now let's talk efficiency. For these comparisons, we divide the miles driven by energy delivered, and that's our calculated efficiency. We saw just 1.9 miles per kilowatt hour here. This is in line with stuff like the Rivian R1T or the Kia EV9. That's a truck and a full-size SUV, very inefficient vehicles. I didn't expect the Ioniq 5 to be the most efficient EV ever, but I certainly expect it to be better than what we're seeing here. The inefficiency is, of course, a result of both the cold temperatures and pretty high winds. For comparison, we tested an EV6 GT in 50-degree weather and managed 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour. And that's the spicy GT version with over 500 horsepower, big wheels and tires, not very efficient. I'd imagine head-to-head, the new regular Ioniq 5 is at least as efficient as that old EV6 GT, but it will be interesting to get an old and new one together at the same time to do these tests head-to-head. Now, I want to do something that is very much an inference, so take these numbers with a huge grain of salt. But first, let's assume the Hyundai Ioniq 5 is able to get 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour under fair conditions. I think this is a really reasonable assumption given that we saw the EV6 GT get 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour, and we've seen the EV6 rear-wheel drive achieve 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour, so 2.3 should be pretty achievable. If we use that efficiency and the known energy delivered, we could assume the Ioniq 5 would probably be able to get around 111 miles in fair conditions. This sounds about right, if a little bit conservative. The EV6 GT got 110 miles, and the EV6 rear-wheel drive got 132 miles. I will say that EV6 rear-wheel drive was tested in really great conditions, but still, we have to go back to our actual result, and that's just 93 miles here on the new 2025 Hyundai Ioniq 5. Despite this very poor efficiency, the result is still well into the upper half of all crossovers. It's better than some cars that we traditionally think of having as pretty good charging curves. The Mercedes EQE SUV, Audi e-tron, Tesla Model Y, they all have respectable charging curves. And the new Ioniq 5 delivered somewhere between 5 and 10 kilowatt hours more than the vehicles I just listed. It's really the charging alone that got this anywhere near a respectable result. The efficiency was truly terrible. Of course, there is an easy explanation with the weather conditions, but it doesn't change the fact that we were short of our threshold of a good result of 100 miles. I'm a bit disappointed, but I'm going to reserve my judgment until I can do some more testing in some more fair conditions or some more head-to-head tests. I really want to see how the new and old ones compare directly. Well, that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching this whole thing, and I'll see you all on the next one.